Thank you. Thanks for having me. I've been talking with Anna for a little while about getting involved here and a little bit, and so I'm excited to be able to do that. I've also had the pleasure of having Matthew Gonzalez intern with me, and now is kind of working with me as he's able to fit me in with the class schedule that you guys have. So it's very nice to be here. I was recently informed about 10 minutes ago that you've gotten a lot of architecture people here, so I'm sure, I don't know, there's obviously some similarities, some common threads coming from a design and architecture background that I'll maybe gloss over a little more than I planned to. But also, my talks be a little bit autobiographical, just as a kind of a little story from where I started, which was more like this, drawing buildings, and kind of try and get to the fun stuff pretty quick. But I will say, so I love drawing, and that's where my creativity started. And so architecture obviously uses drawing quite a bit, and it uses drawing to help understand things and describe things, and it's an intrinsic part of that discipline. So anyways, back in the day, I used to be quite fond of drawing things and finding, this was all from Europe, obviously, and but then you also, start to diagram things, and that's another big part of architecture is conceptualizing your framework, what is making your decisions. And I think you guys have probably gathered from your studies and lectures and that sort of thing that the tie between the two, design and software and computer science, is quite strong. So this could easily be a diagram of software as it is of a building. So anyways, another example. So if you are a drawer, I recommend continuing to do so. I know I don't do it enough these days. So then this brings us to well, first of all, let's see. So everyone's has had some touch designer experience? No? Okay. And then how about just to get a gather of people's interests and stuff, music? You guys pretty into music? Mm-hmm. And maybe playing music? Cool. And then what about just the experience of music or going to a show, or and then do you have an interest in production of said spectacle? Okay. So that's where my life is now. It's much to do with entertainment production and that kind of stuff. And how about like high school drama? Did anybody do that in school, like high school or now? Because I just kind of remind myself all the time that when I'm into this business now that I used to do that in high school, and so there's a thrill to the show, right? If you find that to be exciting, there's a lot of gratification to be had, and nowadays all of this tech stuff and computer software and stuff, people are eating it up. So I highly recommend marrying the two together. Okay, so how about this book? Any of you guys heard of this book? Pattern Language? So I'm surprised actually that other architects haven't brought this up. So when I was in school, I had a really awesome professor in my first and my last year. I kind of likened her to a Yoda-like character. She's kind of mysterious. She would drop things on us to explore and tell us in very, very kind of fuzzy ways how they might be influential to us. And this was one of them. So this is a book by Christopher Alexander. He's sort of a hippie architect from UC Berkeley, and I'm sure he was at other places too, but he was up in Berkeley for a while, and he wrote this book and then a number of other books that are about architecture and design, but it's about looking at it in a he didn't know it at the time, but a programmatic way, almost like software. And so what happened is he wrote this book, and this is about looking at buildings and the problem of making social space and all the pragmatic needs of a building, plus all the social needs and cultural needs as a set of issues that can be confronted with different patterns, right? So you need a roof over your head when you're going to walk into a building. Well, that makes the porch, right? And then when you walk into the building, you need a place to take your shoes off, so that makes the foyer, the mudroom. But each of these things has a use, right? And then it connects to other things in certain ways. And what he didn't realize, and says he was up in the Bay at a time when just things were getting really, really heady in terms of people thinking about where the future was going to go. His concepts of using patterns to build buildings married perfectly with the kind of the nascent Silicon Valley. And this book actually had way, way more of an impact. In fact, it had one of the biggest impacts. I don't know. It basically invented object-oriented programming. The concepts in here directly inform the people who started object-oriented programming. And that, for me, I didn't realize it at the time, but there would be this big full circle thing for me. So I recommend looking at this, and maybe if since you're in the applied computer science department, you might look at the sort of derivative works that came after that are more directly applied to computing, because you read this and it's very much about building, and it's a little dry. It's kind of I don't know, a little fanciful. He was almost ridiculed by a lot of his peers because he was seen in some ways as being backward looking. But I liked that story that in fact he shrouded this sort of almost cutesy architectural treatise. He used that to conceal a much bigger kind of truth. So I think there's a bunch of books that use a similar name, a pattern language for software and stuff like that. And there's a book about basically all of the things that we rely on now as software programmers. There's a long kind of pedigree back to this book that we don't really know about. But so you can think about how that might directly apply to software, is that you make objects that confront, that interface with other things, and they have patterns to do that with, and then they interface with each other, and that's what creates a piece of software, right? And typically, everything we write now is object-oriented, right? It's little definitions that go together and talk to each other and make a bigger whole, just kind of like a building does. But anyways, so I was at school, and then I got into music, and things got a little weirder, and I started, I used to doodle as a kid, and then I started doodling as an architecture student, and then I started meeting musicians, and one of the bands that I started meeting was called Silent Diner, and I started drawing posters for them while I was still in school, and that sort of kicked me off into more of the music realm, and just goofy psychedelic doodles for them, and booking and promoting them in school and getting more involved. And then anyways, I had to do my thesis, which was about a farmer's market in my hometown. And at the same time I was learning, it's interesting, if you go to architecture here now, I'm sure you're mostly learning CAD and Rhino and Revit and all that stuff. I'm not that old, but we didn't really touch computer programs for architecture until our last year at school. So I got a lot of fun at making sort of hybrid renderings, right? I use Rhino to get lighting studies and then draw over it and stuff like that. So I don't know, it's this sort of analog digital combination is an interesting thing. So that's like a rendering with a sketch over it. So anyways, I left school, moved with the band up to Boston to try and make it work, but the poster artist doesn't make any money in a band, so I had to get a job as an architect, and then got the privilege of working on this building for my entire time at my first job. And the cool thing about this building is, I don't know, I just thought it was cool, but it really worked. That's the real building. Anyways, while working there, the band was short-lived, but the bassist and I became good friends, and we started talking about audiovisual stuff. This is sort of like a classically trained guitarist friend of mine, and then me as a sort of classically trained architect, and of course we both liked like electronic music, which of course is very lends itself to audiovisuals, right? Because it's made with computers often, or things other than more nuanced analog instruments. You can get data off of it more easily and do stuff with it in a different discipline. Anyways, we said, oh, wouldn't it be cool to lights and music together? Now, obviously, that's a thing that's been happening for a while, but this has been a space in the last 10 or 15 years that has just been exploding, right? Combining audio and visual art together. So, anyways, things got weirder with the drawings, which is cool. And then we decided we needed to figure out how to do all this stuff. So Matt, my friend, went and started taking classes at the Berklee College of Music for digital production. Ableton, Logic, Max MSP, which we'll get to in a second. And then I didn't know what the heck to do. There was very little precedent for, well, I just didn't know. But maybe because I was in Boston and found processing finally, right? And I think nowadays, if you started Googling digital software art, you probably find processing pretty quick. So who's been using processing? So that obviously that it was sort of made by these guys. One of them is here and one of them was there in Boston to help teach creatives software programming, right? So have you guys enjoyed processing? Has it been a big part of your learning for software? Would it have been the first thing you learned in software?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so the same for me. And I'm sure I did all the things you do in lower school, like logo and things to start learning computers. And then nowadays, I think this is the equivalent, right? This could be probably taught in high school. So anyways, that's processing. When I moved here, I spent a couple months at home in Oregon and delved into this particular book and started doing these kinds of things, which probably may end up looking a lot like what everybody does at their first time processing, right? You draw a circle, and then you don't clear the buffer, and then you draw another circle, and you get a pattern, and then you start to realize that you can come up with all these algorithmic patterns, and you leave them there, you let them fade slowly, and then you start to create objects, and you can define, and you have three things moving, and then, or parameters, right? You start to animate it, and then you can tweak the parameters, and now you're off to the races, right? We basically have a visual synthesizer already, right? And so I got really into that, and making things, dots, and then eventually dots and lines, and to be honest, that's about all I still do is dots and lines when I do creative programming. This was a little audio reactive thing. So at this point, I'm in LA now. Matt Davis and I moved here. He first, then I got rid of my Boston job and moved here. Still had to work as an architect. So I worked at a couple firms around here, but was learning processing more and more. And then I found a couple other pieces of software. I put these in the wrong order, but I'll skip over that one. This one first. Anybody hear data? Or Max MSP? It's kind of the same. Pure Data is the open source version made by the same guy originally, Miller Puckett, down in San Diego, actually. And then after that, I found, first this VDMX, which is a more traditional, actually, VJ program, but it's still quite open-ended and modular. And the reason I was interested in that is because it allows you to use this, which doesn't exist anymore and nobody cares, but it's Quartz Composer for Apple. Maybe you can still open it up with developer tools, but I wouldn't recommend it. but it's node based, right? Just like this. So the cool thing about Quartz Composer was you could create node based plugins and then open them up in VDMX, which is a more like fully featured. It's got, I can connect a MIDI controller, right, and start doing knobs. I can throw in media. I can make sequencing. I can create stuff on a timeline. I can have presets and all these things that like you might expect in a piece of real software, right? But the cool thing was then it had this sort of plug-in architecture where you can build things and put them into the larger program, right? More patterns. So all three of these tools made my first pass at Name the Machine's visual half, and I don't know, this is 2007 or 8. We thought we were pretty cool. This is like kind of a gear setup, so computers and controllers and screens and stuff. And then we made this, and this is probably one of the first times I've used a PowerPoint presentation. So, anyways, so we played around with all this. We quit our jobs that we had here, thought we were rock stars, went to Burning Man, came back and we were broke, and got jobs again, and kept working at it, in our own time. And somewhere around in there, I think through the folks that we went to Burning Man with, a pretty acclaimed cinema effects artist named Franklin London, who was part of our sort of cadre of people over at Burning Man, said that I should look at this, and so I'm gonna just go back there. So touch designer. So basically, and I think this might be the story for a lot of people, maybe back then in the 07 era, was somebody kind of brought it up to them. They're like, hey, check this out. And so Franklin London, he's the gentleman that told me to check it out, was a Houdini artist. Does anyone know what Houdini is? So he's like a super world-class Houdini effects artist. He specializes in like lightning and water and explosions, all the simulation stuff. And of course, as I'm sure you all know, Houdini went to touch, right? The guys who started Houdini split off and made touch. So anyways, the long story short, and I'm sure you guys are all aware, he basically just informed me, it's just like, don't try and do all these little things that you need to do when you're using something like processing, where you have to find the right math library and find the right graphics library and video playback library and MIDI library and all this stuff, right? You have to find all these things, and if the one isn't right, and the other, touch just seems to have it all that basic stuff just there, right? So, so I was sold and got into that, and just make this play. Damn. Such a bummer.
Is it an HDMI connection to the computer or
HDMI. Yeah, but I don't think it's that. Can I just start on this slide, please? Feel free to.
Then the playback tab, you can crank it and say play automatic.
Yeah, that's well, I see. I did it here automatically.
And play full screen, maybe, I don't know.
Start on
And then maybe start on click. That's
Now I start the slide back right at the position.
you go to that one. That should play. So strange. Oh, okay. We can just do it.
Sorry, guys. Anyways, I've started to make stuff like this. Learn how to make kind of basically the same stuff, right? What do you do when you find a new thing? You make what you already know how to make. It's like in VR, you want to make the world around you first before you make fantastical stuff. So, anyways, this was like new stuff, making more refined stuff, right? Because suddenly you're not spending all the time just figuring out how to do the most basic thing, but now you can start to nuance this stuff and get way more into it. So Matt and I are still in cahoots, and we started to bring in more like interactivity, right? Everything we're doing is sort of interactive because it's musical, right? You are interacting with this stuff, whether it's a guitar that's playing a visual or literally you're just playing with a knob. That's interactive, but then you start to add in stuff which I'm sure you guys are all into now, Connect and whatever else. In this example, we had a Guitar Hero thing that we handed out to people and let them mess around with it. So this is like a little installation we did where we just were handing people Guitar Hero bits and they were controlling my little visuals and hearing bizarre things. I think that was for TEDx USC. So we were still just doing little odd jobs, basically. And then I ran into these guys. Has anybody heard of these guys? V² Labs. So not really around now in that name, but V² Labs was headed up by Bella Verkhaus, who's an old LA, previously Chicago, then Los Angeles VJ, like one of the original kind of old school VJs for all the big electronic situations that were going on, and that all evolved into EDC and Ultra and all that stuff. So he's like the old guard who went just with all the guys who kind of created the mega EDM festival, became the visualist of the mega EDM festival, along with a bunch of other things. And so I was brought to V² Labs by a mutual friend of Anna and ours, Brian, who was here at the time as a VJ as well. And I randomly met Bryant through another friend, and then he asked if I wanted to come to VSL. And all of this is, I would say, as a word of advice, I only got this opportunity because I was learning this stuff as much as I possibly could without any financial incentive or anything like that. And so this opportunity just landed in my lap. And at a time when suddenly touch designers' interest in real production was starting to ramp up. Still not, it wasn't that high. So anyways, then I worked with them for a bit, and then we got to do this show, which is a big deal a little while ago. Anybody know the Amon Tobin ISAM show? ISAM Live Projection Mapping show. So I was kind of lucky enough to come at this time. If you don't know of it, you look it up. It's kind of, I don't know, it was kind of right place, right time for the industry. We got the opportunity to make a touring projection mapping show, which at the time was kind of unheard of, because projection mapping at first was, right, you point a projector at a building and then you use After Effects, or it was, some combination of Adobe software, and you hope to God nobody bumps the projector, right? Because then all your work's screwed. And so people are just now trying to figure out, well, how do you, obviously that's not a viable way of making projection mapping a real thing, right? You have to be able to tweak it. And the solution is you have to have a virtual version of what you're mapping, right? Because then you can move the camera, which is the projector in the virtual space. I assume you guys have done a bunch of projection mapping, probably. So when we did this show starting in 2010 into 2011, 2012, to get that form of projection mapping, the sort of what I guess you would call camera matrix style projection mapping figured out was still kind of hard. so it was V Squared Labs and Vita Modis is the designer, and then a firm called Leviathan in Chicago. And one of Leviathan's guys, who's a way more deeper C++ kind of guy, found the right libraries to do basically virtual transforms, and take a virtual object that is equatable in real space, mark the points, and get the camera, right? Which is probably what you guys have done now with it, right? You make sure your cube is really well modeled, and then you pick the points that you're going to mark in the software, and it starts to snap into place, right? So this was like we rolled it ourselves, and we made a plugin, and I had an iPad. So anyways, I got to make this show, and actually this is a piece of content that I created in Touch Designer. This is just a still, but it was a really fun part of the show. And that was like content creation, but also systems programming. And this is where I got an introduction into like, you can do anything you want, right? I can play back video and then add an interactive effect and then have an animation that wipes this across and allows, another, a connect sort of effect to happen. And then but at the same time, I can be tweaking things, and these are all things that a little while ago I was just like, how the heck would you do that without a software team? And so again, Touch lets you do all that. And this was a project where I learned all that. So it included the projection mapping element, but it also literally was playing back all our video, and it was triggered from Ammon inside of the cube. As he was playing music, we would step along with it. And then other parts of the show were very much interactive. And then he had a connect back there that had an effect that was mapped out across the cubes. And but lots of production stuff to figure all that out. But essentially, the Touch Designer ran everything for the show. Some funny things. When we got the show and I learned about it, I hadn't done any projection mapping, so I did that in my bedroom. I had a box and a bottle and tried to map them, and so that's a successful mapping, I guess. And then also, I'm starting to think about systems again, right, and patterns and modules and things. So this is a diagram of the playback system of that show, right? And there's ins and outs and little sub modules and stuff like that. So Touch Designer is really good for that. And I mean, probably the level that you guys are at now, you're kind of most of your things are out in one place, or maybe box some of them up, but they're all kind of wired together, right? As you advance in Touch Designer, what starts to happen is you get modules that just sit next to each other, and then they talk to each other in a more sophisticated way. And they have connections that are more about, it's like, oh, I'm the output module, and I'm the playback module, and I'm the config module, and I'm the media library, right? And all these things need to interface with each other. But it's not just as simple as one noodle going into another one, right? It's like, at any given time, I might need to reference this many things from the media library. But at the same time, I need to talk to my config module and get this data before I execute something else, right? So that was probably one of the first times I really started building touch projects in that way. That was just, I don't know, that was like a tiny scale model of it that we worked with. And those are the mark points, right? There's people building it. This was in the Czech Republic, I think, where I got to map the structure in front of the entire crowd, which was pretty fun. Back to that Velo Werkhouse style work. After we did Ammon Tobin, and we had all this experience with Touch Designer and sequencing stuff, we started going really crazy at these EDM stages, and had a lot of fun with that. I think this is the first year that the Electric Daisy Carnival went to Las Vegas, and they went big. And actually, now they're huge. Now they're even bigger. But they kind of went way big and then topped off for a bit and went down. And so this was a lot of fun. It was the biggest stage I've ever seen. It was mind blowing. And we, in doing that work with Velo, we came up with this, which is, we called it Epic. And so this is the first kind of I don't know, more legit piece of touch software, I would say, right? Because the Amon Tobin show was like, you had an interface, but it had like 5 buttons. It was like, go here, I'll play this, you know, it was very rudimentary. But you look at this and it looks a bit like that other program, the VDMX that I showed you, right? And so this is still Touch Designer, but it's just crazy, right? And there's all this stuff going on, and we had all these options, and this is when it got deep, right? Then you have all these needs that you would expect in any kind of software: presets, plugins, effects, clip libraries, clip bins, automation, MIDI mapping, right? You want to be able to quickly just say, oh, I want this knob to whizzle that parameter now. I don't want to go in and program. I don't want to right click and say this and get that, right? All this stuff. I don't know, like Resolume. You guys know like the software Resolume at all? It's another VJ software. Or you could talk, you know, Ableton. Audio software is probably a little more familiar to people in terms of what performance might look like, but that is where this is going. Right? This is bespoke and custom performance software that I started getting into in this era. So you look at this, and it's essentially a big flow from left to right from generation. So these are all, you know, these are procedural Touch Designer effects, and then some media, and then mixing, or we call it the submix, and then big mixing, which is like applying all of this in however the current performer wants to the output, right? And the output of these things are these massive video screens, right? And the equivalent, you know, nowadays 4K kind of solves things, but usually you would, these huge stages would be the equivalent of 3, 4, 5, 6 HD screens worth of pixels, right? And that was a big problem for a while. It's like, because right, your nice GTX card can do 4 outputs, right? And so how do you do that with that? So there were all these crazy ways of figuring that out. But anyways, we came up with all these techniques for mapping. It's another kind of mapping, LED mapping, where you have all these tiles of LED everywhere, and then you have to choose where things go. Just like with projection mapping, it's just that the output technology is a bit different. So anyways, but again, every one of these kind of little things is a module inside of Touch, and they all go together. And so then, this is another video, but it's just kind of garish and silly. This was actually Swedish House Mafia at Madison Square Garden, which we ran with the system. And then, so that's funny, I clicked it, which you would think would make it play. Maybe it is something to do with the HDMI. Anyways, at the same time, I was using, and then maybe this gets to my other, I don't know, piece of advice. All of this common thread of stuff that you develop, and then you start to think about how you're going to reuse it. And so, back to Matt and I, that's Matt and me, and we kept doing our thing creatively, which I think I was really grateful to be able to keep doing that. And we're performing, and I used a lot of what I made to inform that. So some of these pieces of visuals are more advanced and nuanced versions of some of the stuff I developed, you know, for big garish EDM stages where it's like everyone has a 30 millisecond, you know, attention span. It doesn't really matter, but these things that I did, you know, I started to get more, you know, I wanted to see how very much more nuance and such like that. Looking at it now, it's old and it shows its age a bit, but and I do have a video of this, but so I will just pop back out for a second. So we got to do a big performance, about a 35-minute performance in 2014, apparently, at the Downtown Independent, and so there's a whole, you can, if you care, you can go on Vimeo to Name the Machine's Vimeo and see this, but I wanted to just pop in and show a little bit of it, because this is all generative, right? This is all being rendered live. So it's basic to some degree. I'm sorry, that was a bit of a lie. It's a combination of those things, right? This, I had a little bit of media playback in here, but I wanted to show a couple different bits of the. These kinds of, so basically it was like a world that we kind of journeyed into. And but the cool thing is we are playing this, right? We're using Ableton and instruments and synthesizers and stuff to kind of inform all of this. And it eventually goes into this kind of landscape, right? Where all the different pieces are being triggered by different pieces of music, different parts of the music. And I think even in this one I had a joystick, right? That I could kind of look around this world, and speed it up and slow it down and stuff like that. And then I think we kind of went up into space a little while. And then got, a little more mysterious and that kind of thing. Anyways, quite a bit of fun. We literally practiced it. It's live. It's not just, we're not just letting it run. Anyhow, so that was the last big thing that Matt and I did as kind of, I would say, creatively. We continue to be creative, but at the same time, name the machine itself, we were turning it into a bit of a business. And then I made a deal basically with Velo that I could take what I had done, upgrade all of it in the name of one of my clients, Bass Nectar, and bring what I learned in the upgrade back to Epic. And so I made the Bass Nectar UNS, the ultimate nerd server, coined by Bass Nectar himself, and which obviously you can see there's a similarity to that other piece, the Epic piece. This was a similar media server built in Touch, but it had some very specific requirements to the way that Bass Nectar played his shows, and so essentially I got to redo everything. And that's something I wanted to that's something I was thinking in my head on the way over here, something just as a lesson to convey is you get this opportunity, especially with a set of tools that already lets you stand on a lot of people's shoulders, in the sort of software legacy of being able to, we're always building on other people's software, right? Touch Designer has thousands of licenses and libraries that it's using under the hood. But we can do that with our own stuff, right? And we can, but the cool thing is, whereas, you read like, Adobe's new version of Premiere is ground up rebuild, right? Which that sounds really expensive for a real software company, but people like us, if depending on where you go with your career, in my career, ground up rebuild is a really nice thing because it's relatively quick to make this stuff compared to real kind of a software company. And so you learn this stuff and then you rebuild it, and it just gets better every time. So for instance, I would call this the next version of Epic in a way, and then this informed the next version of Epic after that. And then I recently just made this, which is the new version of this, right? They look about the same, but and obviously this is just the UI. I was gonna pop this open for real. This is my newest system, just so you guys can see a crazy touch network. But that's just a thing that I've learned through the years. It's just like, you'll revisit, you'll stick with something for a couple of years even, and then you'll scrap it all and rebuild it. But the important thing is to try to keep track of it. I think Matthew mentioned, I'm not necessarily talking about project documentation all that much, but programming documentation. When I was first learning this stuff, you just like save as and you throw it out and you forget about it and stuff like that. One thing I would say is if you have an idea or you try something out that you think might be useful later, make a note of it or try to put the little sketch you made somewhere where you can find it again. Because I can't tell you the number of times where I've been like, I know I've solved this before. Like I know I have a touch project or a piece of Python code or a piece of Java or somewhere that I've done this before and I can't freaking remember where I put it. So now I have like a, I got like a Dropbox where all that stuff goes into it, right? And you can always go trying to find it, and everybody comes up with their own ways of filing it and being able to search it or whatever. But I highly recommend that as a sort of form of organization because it really does help you continue. So, anywho, that's kind of that. And then these are just more pictures. And then everything else is kind of just slideshow of like stuff that I've gotten to, visual stuff I've done in touch design since getting what I consider to be pretty decent at it. That's my dog in the Connect. And then this is another big set of work that we've done is for the Intel Corporation and their kind of live performances at things like CES and stuff like that. So I kind of just glance through these real quick and then I can do questions that maybe pop up in a touch network or two. This is cool. This is a fluid simulation that I had a gentleman named Vincent Jose out of New York help me with. He's a super awesome touch Houdini mega genius kind of guy. You can find some of his work on touch in forums and GitHub where he's shared it. Also highly recommend that if you're into touches, get on the forums, ask questions, don't give up. Keep asking questions. Try to refine your questions so that people can give you the right answers without, you want to be specific, right? And you need to be active. It helps in the learning process. So anyways, Vincent has some stuff that's really cool to look at. And you see little thing, this is all interactive stuff. I've got videos of this, but if we have time. Yeah. Actually, this one, I think we can find on the web, because I don't know if I have it in the presentation. It's a website. This one's a bit cheesy. this bit, but I'm not going to show the whole thing because it's actually pretty long. But I'll try to glance through it. Musicians playing air instruments with Intel kind of devices. But all the graphics are mine in the background there. What I want to do is get. Please welcome the rest of the band. This was very cheesy. These were drones playing keyboards. But to Intel's credit, this was not just timelined out. We're actually grabbing locative data from the drones, and they're pressing these notes. So they're fun because they wanted it to be real, not BS.
Can you make the sound?
I've tried to put it up as far as I can.
Try?
Is it one of these?
Before?
Aaron went to strike the key. Aaron went to strike the keys for that entirely unique version of Chopsticks, which I hope you enjoyed. So next up, right. So why don't we try? All right. Let's check something out.
So this wasn't my viewing, but this was artificial intelligent,
1 sec.
like tensor-based
Get the groove again.
musical
Ready?
responses.
5, 6,
So another part of our kind of crew helped with this. So I'm just doing the visuals here. These AI things are generating musical responses with neural nets, which is pretty cool. And these characters are actually made in Unity and then captured into Touch Designer, and then I'm doing this sort of interstitial graphics.
Both at the same time and get responses. Data, right? They can just play my piano, but I'd like to have it back, please. It's more fun if we play together.
Automatically.
So here we go.
Pretty fun.
It gives me amazing pleasure too.
And then this is kind of the climax. So this dancer has tracking devices on her, and just about everything on stage is reacting to her position.
Are the lights also controlled like that?
They do at times. There's a time where she kind of goes and lights them up. We tried to get her to really be able to move them, and Tate would not have it. They were freaking out because we got it. We connected these motors to her bands, and they started going crazy. And even once we got it smoothed down, they were like so antsy about being able to move them. But yeah, this fluid system is quite cool. And that's really about it. At the end, they do all this crazy stuff. So, corporate stages have a lot of toys.
Let's hear it for Dingo.
Yeah, so that was actually one of the most recent things we did this last January. I think that's these are other things we've done with Intel. I don't have any videos, but all of this was based on these radio tracking sensors that they developed. And that was an interesting flow because it was the most OSC data I've ever seen. You guys use OSC here a decent amount. You know what that is? It's Open Sound Control.
UDP?
So it's just a formatted form of UDP messages that are better. It's very basic. It's just a way of sharing very basic data types across UDP networking in a relatively standard way. So most of these kinds of programs will use OSC now as a way to stream. So XYZ data for a sensor or anything like that, really. So in these cases with these sensors, and then you suddenly put like 5 dancers on stage, and it's spitting out at a rate of 240 hertz. That's a lot of data actually coming. And so that was a new experience to me to learn how to deal with that. Because usually with these kinds of projects, you're like, oh, I got like 5 channels worth of data in to mess around with, right? And this was, here, I'll open up the project. It was a lot. So that was learning. You do these bigger and bigger projects, and you have to build better infrastructure, because what might have worked for your garage suddenly doesn't cut it anymore. So maybe I'll poke for some projects, and then should I do some questions or something about while I do that? So if anybody's got any questions. Otherwise, I'm gonna open.
What's it like as far as like the workflow goes? Working on a project that, like you said, has like a commercial stage, and like the one for like Intel, versus like a project that you would make for something like EDC or like a concert setting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean they're different industries, and the nice thing, I feel fortunate to be able to hop around in them, because it's just like sort of a shared set of skills that I have that can apply to all of them. But it's just a different culture, and that's, you kind of learn how to navigate each one. So like, yeah, the EDC kind of style, that level of production, or the same with Bass Nectar and like the David Gilmour show that I did. Those are kind of a top-notch enough level that they, it's pretty professional. But it's, it's always going to be faster turnaround, maybe a little less money, but also a little more, people are a little more loosey-goosey, and that can be good and bad. I think Touch Designer is really helpful in those scenarios because it's so much faster than a lot of other things, right? You can make adjustment, everything, there's no compiling, right? Everything's running. So in the music area, it can be way better because you can make adjustments quickly. There's other software called like D3, and that's a production level video software that is making inroads into the same ways, but it still ends up being way more robust but way less flexible, right? So I think that's a big difference, right? You'll come to find in the music and showbiz that people want to see stuff quickly and lots of it, whereas in corporate land they want to see stuff happen perfectly like 100 times before it actually happens. So they're totally willing to like not mess with it if it's gonna put a risk to their show. So yeah, different mentalities for sure. This is the big OSC data parser thing, right? Goes deep, every one of these. There's lots of levels. All these techniques for streaming lots and lots of, so here, 571 OSC channels, I think these are all the dancers and drones. And then that's not all that many there. If anybody has any other questions, shoot.
Can you talk a little bit more about those sensors and how you smooth the data?
Yeah. So Curie, these were at one time they were called Curie sensors, and now I think it's called like Intel Location Services or something. So they came in at a super high rate. I think I might even have a recording of that somewhere. Backup recordings. And it's 120 to 240 hertz, right? So usually we run touches under at 60 hertz, so it's double or 4 times how much we're doing. And in touch, there's certain things that when they there's a big, in touch, one of the baseline theories is you keep it at a certain frame rate, and then it does all these things to keep you there, right? And if you lose frames, it tries to get you ahead. It's called time slicing. But there are a way when it gets data at that rate, it will try and react to it. And so that's both good and bad. And the way we actually did it, and this, in fact, this is a little touch app, right? If I go into the perform mode, I'm going to kind of act as if you guys know what I'm doing. But this is the performance interface for this whole network. This touch program ran alongside the big one, the renderer, right? And this guy, which I call the data parser, was responsible for getting all the OSC data in. And so it actually, I don't know if you can see it, but it runs at 120 hertz.
Oh.
Right? So it's running, in fact, I think I even tried it at 240. And there's all these techniques in touch. If anybody, if you guys need this kind of info, there's lots of little tips and tricks that are relative. It's kind of like I can dole out, and if you guys need them, but I think Anna's probably done this stuff too, but if you don't draw on the monitor, then you can run at whatever refresh rate you want to, because it's not trying to sync up to the monitor. So when you need to do things in touch that don't deal with the graphics output, you can run other processes and then run it really fast, or run it in the what we call non-real time, right? Where you just say run as fast as you possibly can instead of trying to stay at a certain frame rate, and that can be helpful too. And then in the educational and pro and commercial level versions of the software, you then, in order to actually facilitate this, you use what's called shared memory, which is just a feature of touch, which essentially puts a bunch of data in a memory block and tells another process where it is, and then it can live there. Literally are sharing RAM basically, and that's the fastest way to push data between touch. So that's how we multi-thread in touch, right? And so this data parser is doing a lot of smoothing, a ton of filtering, actually, I think like multiple steps of filtering, because these little sensors, since they're radio-based, they're doing this, like the positions are just like, whoa, right? Mm-hmm. It's not very helpful if you've got some beautiful, nuanced, flowy thing, and then it's just, you lose it when the data. So these Intel projects in that radio-based location and stuff like that, and you get it with Connect too and stuff, teaches you a lot about sensor data, right? Because it's not perfect. It's never perfect when it first comes in, especially if you're building it yourself or something like that. So yeah, lots of filtering. And there's lots of, I learned a lot from the guys at Intel, techniques of different ways of filtering, right? In touch, there's lots of filter options, but I was doing weird things where I would look at the average over time, and we would change our filter depending on how the data was looking at any given time. So yeah, so this little touch project became the meat of these shows, right? Almost everything was flowing through them, and then to the thing that was actually making the images. So yeah.
This project, how long did it take from the proposal phase to the final phase?
October of last year. October of last year to January.
That's pretty fast.
Yeah, pretty quick. We had a relationship with them already because we did we did CES 2016, and that we got in talks with maybe in August the 2015, but we weren't like pedal to the metal until October again, I think. But we had laid a lot of groundwork and there was more creative back and forth on that one, the storyboarding and stuff. Whereas the last one, the 2018 one, we kind of had a trust, I guess, and so we just kind of can you just do something that's got kind of cool and stuff. Those ones are cool because there was a decent amount of creativity involved, and luckily not a ton of what many people experience in the corporate world is people who are very overbearing with their marketing principles and color cues and stuff like that.
Can you also elaborate on the process of storyboarding, as you mentioned, because ultimately, you as an artist, you have an idea whether they're points or lines, or you're also building this accumulated library, and often there's areas that you want to explore, but then with each project there's constraints. Mm-hmm. So let's say if you go to a first schematic design meeting, since Touch Designer is your main platform, do you do then some simulations in Touch Designer? Do you still use sketching as a form of communication? So it would be great to see. Yeah,
I definitely use Touch as a previs tool often. I'm trying to see if these are some boards that we have done. These are really rough, but there's some doodles. But even like these are generated in touch actually, and then I draw on top of them. That's actually, so that's a touch previs that from that guy Vincent's free kind of version of his stuff. So yeah, I depending on the project, touch is definitely part of that process too. And I've done it on my own, but I haven't done it like for a client. But you know, VR previs is a big deal, of course, these days, and touch does that to some degree, obviously, but and then of course, just because it's procedural, it really helps. It can really be a help in design. And I think that's why like things like Houdini are actually. I was surprised to hear how much Houdini has made its way into things like design practices and stuff. And so touch has the same thing, whether it is like a stage design or content design. You know, just adding proceduralness lets you, whether it's in VR or just on your screen and looking at something, really adapt and see things change. So, yeah, I use it all the time for that kind of stuff. I'm trying to see if I have another storyboard that might have more of it. This looks about the same. Yeah.
And for example, for a show like this, since it's also a performance and you have to work with the performers as well, so did you do rehearsals here in LA before loading and before going?
Yeah, well, that one. I mean, luckily in those shows, like we're a small cog in a much bigger production, and so our rehearsals. Sometimes we would have the people come down here just for like tech rehearsals, right, in a room like this where you're just kind of shaking the sensors around and stuff. And or we went up to Portland, to where Intel is, or Santa Clara, Silicon Valley. And then for real deal rehearsals in the corporate world, and this is back to your question, Eddie, they rented out a whole nother venue, right? That's not the venue where the event occurred. And then that one was the Cow Palace outside of San Francisco, which has a leaky roof, which sucks. So, but yeah, so. Eventually, for those kinds of shows, it's full-on rehearsals with everything involved in the show, built in another place, right? And it's cool. You get to see it all go up, and for those guys who are setting all that stuff up, it's basically a trial run, because the real venue typically won't let you stay that long, right? You have to be in and out. So same with tours and stuff, like music tours. They'll go. You find a place that isn't super booked in the middle of nowhere usually, and set up at some arena or something, and then take it on the roads. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting, like the role of Beer's company within a show production. So they're doing all the creative pitches of what the performances are going to be, what are the content. They are going to design the content. They're working on the interactivity. Later, they're designing the show system, they're coding, they're making the program that actually runs the production. And then they're actually, once you're at the show, they're running it live. And they're doing show control, and they're working with, like, can't imagine, how many other parties were you working with at the show? You're working with lighting, you're working with sound, and
lighting, sound, interactive, people who are programming these devices themselves, and flashing the firmware and stuff like that, and and then there's general production people who are in charge of the story, and it's kind of the timeline of the entire thing. I mean, the shows that we've done for those guys, it's like we fit into one part of a much larger thing, and that is its own mini production in an even bigger production, basically. And it's pretty crazy. There's like a team involved in that, who answers to an even bigger team, basically. But yeah, it's a funny space. Like I was saying, it's all of those things at once, and sometimes it gets a little much. But it's becoming more and more normal. Like people sort of expect this kind of thing, interactive performance and that kind of stuff. And And there's all those sides to it, and I'm sure you guys are aware, like, it's not. In the old days, it was pretty easy to do, like, design and then creation and then publishing or whatever. And so now they're just all intertwined because it's like game design, right? It's like if you want something to look really badass, super high def, but obviously there's a limitation to the computational ability. Then suddenly whoever is designing the super badass thing needs to be aware of the limitation, and then now you're multidisciplinary already, right? So yeah, same kind of deal. This is the base nectar system, and I just wanted to see that's an example of that's all the modules involved, right? And see how they're kind of just flat like that. There's not many noodles in this touch network until any one of these starts to have more noodles, right? But then out here it's like real clean, right? So it's just an example of where I've found myself getting to with Touch Designer in terms of how these things look. Sometimes they're real basic. Sometimes what's really important is hiding in a place like this, right? And this, I haven't really talked about this much, but right, sometimes most of the smarts are here in Python code nowadays, right? Lots and lots of code too. So if you really get into Touch, you'll find that you're not escaping typing code because the real stuff still happens in good old Python to some degree. In fact, this project has a shared code base here. Matthew's gotten a little bit of experience helping me set this stuff up, but these are all different Python classes basically that run this whole project, right? And there's different copies of each one of these sitting around throughout the project doing different things. And then this is like my what do you call it, repository or something of all the code in the project. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
So, on one end of the spectrum, you have the creativity of the creator, which is yourself, and then on the other end, you have the client's like vision of whatever they want. How often do you find yourself on one end of the spectrum and the other when you're working on this kind of thing?
Do you mean, do I find myself as a client myself?
Like in the sense of whatever you're working on something for someone, whether it be yourself or for a company or just experimentation,
Mm-hmm.
how often do you end up either like making a concession
Oh.
or they end up being like, okay, this is better than what I wanted, and you end up
Yeah.
liking that. Like how often are you in the middle of gray area?
Yeah, oh, it's always the gray area. I'd say if you're doing it professionally, right? It's very rare to get everybody gets what they want kind of situation. In show business more than corporate business, there's definitely egos and stuff like that, and at that point, things work themselves out. Whether it's people leaving, throwing their hands up, or people conceding and that kind of stuff. I personally have found that I feel like a nice niche where I don't, on creative matters, I actually prefer to stay a bit under the radar because my own personal aesthetic is my own aesthetic, and it's like a minimalist sci-fi kind of thing, which isn't typically what most of my clients want. Intel was a nice thing because they actually wanted like data visualization and cool little widgets and stuff, and I was like, yeah, I love, it's easy to make and touch, it's fun. So that was a benefit of that one. I think that's one reason why we've done so many things with them, is because it just happened to align, right? They want to see relatively straightforward, sort of but slick looking data graphics plus some abstract data art, right? Which just kind of lined up with my own creative. But then in the case of like Base Nectar here, I like some of the visual aesthetic that we see in that show, but not all of it. And so I've positioned myself in that camp as the tech guy, basically. And then when I have an opportunity, especially when I'm actually running the show, because sometimes I get called to go run the show if our normal operator isn't doing it, then I can interject my own fun into there. That usually that in particular comes more in a place of performance than aesthetic, right? Like when you're actually running the show, you get to decide when to add the nuance of things, which is quite a bit of fun when you've got, especially when it's your own system. You know all the little tips and tricks to make things do cool things. But yeah, it's an interesting debate. So in my mind, I'll take it if the creative vision lines up with mine, then I'll sort of offer my own creative vibe. But our little outfit isn't big enough to be like completely full service. So if somebody needs like a very specific vision made in terms of the content or something like that, we'll try to find a partner who can take that on. And very often it's the partner who comes to us. And what I mean is somebody hires a creative person whose aesthetic they like, who we happen to know, and then they bring us in. So that's another, it's a very LA thing, right? Everybody knows each other, and you do good enough on a few things in this town, and then people start calling you. So that's, yeah. So like a good friend of mine is David Wexler, who's goes by DJ Strange Loops. I don't know if he's getting big into VR audio visuals now, but he's Flying Lotus's visualist, and he's the one who actually hired me to work on the David Gilmour Hollywood Bowl thing, which was a lot of fun. So yeah, in that case, it's a lot of connections and pairing up the right team. Part of it.
Do you have the students just did their first data visualizations in Touch Designer this week? Do you have any database that we could look by chance, or not?
So it's funny, Matthew and I have been doing a little bit of data viz, and it's hard for me to know what that actually means because I think the only real data viz that I've done is probably more like this, where it's just kind of this. I don't know if that's a great example, but like that Intel stuff where it's more like, let's see, you know what I mean, like little readouts of what's going on. But I have actually relatively little experience in like taking a data set and visualizing it. It's something I'm fascinated by, and I've always wanted to get into that. And I don't know much about it in practice, but I definitely look at a lot of data viz for inspiration and stuff. My father is a medical statistician on like a big level. He goes through lots of stuff, and we've talked about it before, and so it's something that I want to do. Yeah, you guys will have to show me.
We're starting.
Yeah.
Great. Any questions?
Was that device that you took out a sensor or something? Or?
Oh no, I plugged it in because I was for this to run, it had to be plugged in. Just, there was some external stuff on it. It's just a hard drive. So nothing special.
With that, we want to really thank you for your lecture, and it was really exciting because I know through Anna they've been really exposed to Touch Designer, but it's very exciting to see really how much information in process.
Yeah.
So,
Use touch.
well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.